Welcome to Stay Humble podcast, Martin Johnson. First, I want to start with is a 3-word check-in to describe how you are feeling today.
3-word check-in. I am energized. I've just come from a meeting, a really good meeting about some work we might be doing with an organization. So I'm energized. I'm optimistic post-COVID. So obviously we've had a challenging 3 or 4 months, but I've always felt optimistic. But I'm optimistic now more than ever. And I guess the third one is attacking. I'm going to use the word attacking. So as well as being energized and optimistic, my view through all of this has been I want to attack, not defend in everything I do, whether that's the business that we're running, attacking on investments, on proceeding with product development. I've even bought a personal property, a second property, a buy-to-let from a personal perspective, because I just see it as an opportunity.
No, that's great. What I would say for myself, I'm a little bit tired because I've just been doing some extra work, just at a care home for residential kids. So I'm a little bit tired from that, just doing a couple of hours there. I'm engaged in terms of listening to what you want to tell to me about and stuff, and I'm just, probably learning from you will be a really good one to talk about. And what I wanted to firstly go over is obviously from reading your book about I Am Human and 30 Mistakes to Success. I wanted to just cover your sort of sense of purpose. So you talk about the iceberg analogy. Can you elaborate that for the listeners in terms of the 3 parts of the how, why, and the where?
Yeah. So what we have, or what I developed probably over the last 10 to 15 years, was this understanding of what makes human beings think, feel, act, and behave. And, I felt that many organizations and many trainers, many consultants, many people, when they read self-help books, they focus on the above the waterline behaviors, characteristics, and traits of human beings, and they want to explore why they, the way they act and the way they come across and what their personality style is. But that's only one layer of the iceberg for me. So with all human beings, we have sort of 3 layers. We have the above the waterline behaviors, which people see and observe. So you can only judge people based on what you see and observe in them, their behaviors, the way they conduct themselves. But we have 2 other layers. Now, what we found in performance psychology is when you strip people back, there's something driving and regulating those behaviors in the form of unconscious motivators. So between the ages of 1 to 21 years old, roughly, when our brain is developing, we start to form 1 or 2 key motivators called unconscious motivators, which drive and regulate our behavior. They are the things, it's the way we see the world. It's what we have to have fulfilled on a daily basis. But coming to your point, there is a 3rd layer of the iceberg, which is if the motivations that manifest within us drive our behavior, where do those motivations come from? And that's our sense of purpose. So in those formative years, we find in the work that we do, Dave, that there are 3 main environments where those motivations can come from. Your parents, the way your parents parented you, your early social exposure, so the estate you grew up in, or the village, or the friends you knocked around with, and your educational exposure, your educational years. So parental, social, and educational. And what we find is the key events that happen in your formative years in those 3 areas are called anchors in psychology. It starts to form your motivations and the way you see the world, which then forms your personality and your behavior. So yeah, my sense of purpose, if you think about that analogy, I can track back to my sense of purpose being at maybe 11 years old. My parents separated. My dad moved out. My mum struggled with 3 kids. We moved from our home to a council estate. And it was the first time in our life where really we struggled, and I had to grow up fast and become strong and self-reliant and fend for myself and chip in around the house and all the rest of it. And I think that was the early forms of my sense of purpose to really do well in life and succeed and achieve. So, I fast forward to now, I'm 38 years old and I've got 3 kids and a wife, and I never want them to struggle or to be in that position. So whenever I'm having a bit of a wobble, or whenever I'm struggling, or whenever I, have a challenge, I always think back to my sense of purpose, which is being 11 years old, not having much, struggling and watching my mother struggle. And it instantly brings me back in the room. That's the reason why I'm willing to offer the significant contribution required to be successful. Does that make sense?
Yeah, definitely. It's a great way of explaining that analogy to me. And what I wanted to just touch on now in terms of that sort of people's sense of purpose with this sort of situation of a lockdown and people's work being affected, how with it been taken away, like, so do you feel people's like sense of purpose or motivation has been taken away because of this sort of lockdown and the jobs, they might have lost their jobs, they're not in the work and stuff like that? Do you think that's been changed for people?
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting one. What I always have this sort of question come at me: can you change depending on your current circumstance? Well, if you look at them three layers of the iceberg, what we find is that your sense of purpose, so the origins of what causes you to see the world the way you see it, and therefore your unconscious motivators that drive behavior, they don't tend to change. They're pretty deep seated in you and makes you who you are. What changes is the above the waterline behaviors. So how you react and respond to those motivations and sense of purpose. And I think what will have happened in lockdown or through COVID is people still have their core sense of purpose. They still have their motivations in life, but maybe the perspective around them has changed. So maybe some people have completely relaxed and let go of some stuff and realize that they have to slow down or that they're going to make some changes in their life for the better. Maybe people have gone the opposite way and decided that actually it's time to stand up and get motivated and drive some goals and some results in life. So I think many people will definitely have been influenced and changed by a situation like COVID-19. But I think it's more the way they're reacting to their sense of purpose and motivators rather than them completely having a personality transplant and everything's changed. Does that make sense? I think some people's perception of things has dramatically changed as a result of COVID.
Yeah, I agree. Like, it's obviously had an effect in terms of just like the surroundings and obviously their sort of routines as well. Routine of going to work and having that sort of thing taken away. Do people have to still build sort of routines and habits in their life to still keep themselves motivated for when their time, hopefully, they're able to reintegrate back into their working patterns?
Yeah, absolutely. I think some people have realized, like, sort of, I run a company. I'm a founder of an organization, as well as working for that organization, as well as being a father, as well as being a husband. And one of the things I've realized is, can we as employees and as a team, can we be as productive working more reduced hours and more flexible? I mean, we are pretty flexible anyway, but, did I see a massive drop off in terms of the output? No, I didn't, right? Is it still important, though, that in terms of what we do, we are still present as a team and present when we're delivering what we do? Absolutely. So I think it's made me think about the way we operate, and I found 2 or 3 changes we can make that'll make a massive difference. So I think everybody's had that epiphany, haven't they, that actually I don't need to run around like a headless chicken. I don't need to bombard my day full of stuff. I do need to have some downtime, and I can take some stuff out of my agenda that's going to free me up and it's going to positively impact my overall well-being.
Yeah, I agree. In terms of like time management, people have now actually realised that they've got more time than ever. Using that time wisely rather than thinking, "Oh, I've got to rush." This has now allowed people to sort of re-look at themselves in a sense and know that actually I can make time for these things and be more present, like you said there. I think that's something that they certainly should look at doing. I wanted to ask in terms of that as well, from that sort of experience for people, can people use that to build resilience, from dealing with these sort of setbacks in their lives? Do you think that can be a way of building that up?
Yeah, resilience is a great question, and we get asked a lot about it in our sessions and in our one-to-one work and all the stuff we do here. And I'm a massive believer in resilience. Is only built through adversity, or being pushed out your comfort zone, or being uncomfortable, getting comfortable in being uncomfortable, if you like. And you can't build resilience if you don't face situations head on, or if you don't try to surface things that trouble you and try and reframe them in your mind, if that makes sense. So
yeah,
resilience is there's two tips I'd give on resilience. If you fear something, or if you don't feel very resilient in a certain situation, the only way to become resilient, the first thing is repetition. So putting yourself in the fear. The power of repetition is really important. And I'll give you an example. When I first started doing public speaking, as good as people might have said it was, and as comfortable as I may have looked to people, I wasn't on the inside. I was terrified. And I remember coming away from my first few conference gigs and almost collapsing in the car thinking, never again. You know, it was so nerve-wracking. And that went on with me for about 3 years. I was terrified. I used to get sweaty palms. My heart rate would rise. I used to pace up and down. And I used to be incredibly nervous about doing it. And then I'd do the talk or the gig, and then I'd come off after a positive reaction or a round of applause, and I'd feel great. And it was enough to keep me going back. But let me tell you, for 3 years, I was terrified. And only through the power of repetition, of doing it time and time again, did it get a little bit easier every time. And I can honestly say now, 14 years on, I still get nerves, right? I still get nerves, and it's still that level of fight or flight that releases in me. But I can manage it, and I can turn and harness it and channel it into adrenaline. And now I genuinely enjoy it and get fulfillment from it. But the point being is, to build the resilience up against the fear of public speaking, I had to do it probably 500 times before I remotely became used to it. Now, what do typically the people do in their life? If you're scared of heights, or if you've got a fear of public speaking, or if you've got a fear of whatever it might be, right? Unless you put yourself in that and time again, you're never going to get rid of that fear. In fact, when you avoid it, if you're the type of person who is scared of flying, so you don't get on a plane, you cancel your holiday every year, then that fear grows because your brain goes, well, we got away with that one. Remember, we don't like flying, right? So the fear grows if you avoid it, whereas the fear shrinks when you put yourself in it time and time again through the power of repetition. So the first thing I'd say on resilience is you've got to do something that feels incredibly uncomfortable to you an awful lot of times before you build the resilience level to deal with it. The second thing is reframing something that's happened in the past that has created this anchor in your brain that something's bad or has bad experience. Yeah. So if you've ever fallen out with a family member, for example, Dave, or you've maybe had a really bad experience with a manager in your workplace, you could put an anchor, psychological anchor in your brain that me and my family member hate each other, or management is bad, right? They're all bad managers. So what you tend to do is, because you have that resentment build up, then every time you go into that interaction, it ends up being a negative experience for you. Whereas when you reframe and replay what's happened in the past and take the positives out of it, or look at it from a different context, then you start becoming more resilient against its effects. So, for years, maybe an example of this might be, if my parents split when I was 11, and I was probably incredibly resentful of that for a number of years, which made me angry and probably counterproductive. But only when I became more mature and I reflected on that, actually, it made me incredibly strong, independent, self-reliant. We got by. And would I be the same person now without that past experience? Would I be as driven to succeed without that? Probably no, I wouldn't. So by reframing it into something, into a different way that I view it, it's made me more resilient against its effects. Does that make sense? So
yeah, definitely.
2 tips there. Power of repetition on anything you fear will make you more resilient. And past experiences that are harming you or causing you frustration or anger, you've got to dig them out, not ignore them. You've got to address them, and you've got to reframe them.
No, they're really great points, Martin, that you've covered. It's something that I'm just kind of reading at the moment in Steve Pressfield's The Art of War. I think that's again about it's like the resistance, isn't it, or in terms of people choosing not to do them sort of things. I think that's covered in that sort of book again, and I think that's certainly, from your points there, they're the best ways in terms of building that resilience. I definitely would agree with you on that. Is there? Again, I was just going to refer back to your book in terms of mindset again, and I know that you refer to in your book in terms of open and closed loop thinkers. Do you can you maybe just sort of refer back to that a little bit in terms of how people could use that to help improve their mindset?
Yeah, I mean, I'm passionate about open and closed loop thinking, and it's a piece of research I did over about a 12-month period where. It came to, I knew that there was this type of mindset that a lot of people were getting themselves into, and I didn't know how to describe it. And then I was inspired by reading Black Box Thinking by Matthew Said, and he mentions about cognitive dissonance in psychology. And cognitive dissonance is where we try to justify an outcome. We draw a line in the sand, or we come to a conclusion and we justify it. So I developed this thing called open versus closed loop thinking. And what that means is that, and we all do it in life, closed loop thinking is when we start to predetermine the outcome to a position, scenario, or event. So it's where, I don't know, so the missus or your husband says to you, right, we're going to my mother's and father's at the weekend. And you instantly go, oh, do we have to? Right? Or you'll write off the experience instantly. I do this about anywhere that's remotely, when my wife tells me that we're going anywhere where I'm going to have to queue. So she said to me once, we're going to go to Alton Towers with the kids. And I went, do we have to? Alton Towers, it's going to take 3 hours to get there. The queues are 3 hours long for one 10-second ride. It's going to be £8 a Coke, all this, right? I'm writing it off because I'm very impatient. And that's closed loop thinking. So I'm already deciding it's going to be a bad experience and I don't want to do it. So when I get dragged kicking and screaming, what closed loop thinking does is, if I'm not conscious of it, I'll then proceed to go to Alton Towers, and every little thing that happens, every cue, every little thing I've said will happen, I'm sat there going, I told you so. Does this make sense?
Yeah, it does.
And it's almost like we're trying to justify why we are right and very rarely challenge why we're wrong. And in the workplace, for example, this happens all the time. So somebody will suggest a new idea to do something differently, and another person will instantly say, well, that'll never work. We tried that 5 years ago, bang. And they'll absolutely already put their line in the sand. And then if they disagree with the other person, they'll do all they can to justify why this project will never work, rather than throwing themselves in from an open loop perspective and open the loop and say, well, what's our opportunity here? So when we talk about open versus closed loop thinking, if you're listening to this podcast and you're a person who, in your personal or professional life, you are constantly already writing off opportunities or deciding how something's going to pan out or what might not work or what's going to be, you've got to stop yourself, because it will be what you want it to be. The human psyche is an incredibly powerful thing. It will be what you want it to be. What we want to try and be is an open loop thinker. You still have this gut feeling that this is going to be a waste of time, or I don't want to go there, or this will never work. But you need to ask yourself the question, but am I wrong? And when you ask yourself the question, but am I wrong? Then you open the loop, because you start thinking about alternatives. Well, how could we do it differently and make it work this time? When you start open loop thinking, you start thinking about opportunities. That drives a different set of actions, which almost always drives a different outcome. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, Dave, but I think we all get dragged into a bit of closed loop thinking at times.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, Martin. I think people just have that sort of, they don't look to try and find different ways maybe that could reintegrate something new, like you say, in a workplace environment, or maybe something at home or anything like that. They can use that sort of changing mindset of just being more open with something and willing to maybe give it a try. And then if it doesn't work, then obviously that's that. But I think certainly that's a better way of thinking about these sort of, like your scenario there in terms of a workplace, or your analogy of Alton Towers, of having a bit more of an open mindset. It's maybe a more positive frame of mind, isn't it, really?
It is. And you know what? We went on that Alton Towers trip. I opened the loop. My wife was right. I opened the loop. We went. We had a fabulous day. We did queue 3 hours for rides. It was £8 a Coke, all the rest of it, right? But you know what? I've taken my kids all over the world, Dave. I've taken them to Australia, Mexico, Cyprus, everywhere, right? The only holiday they ever talk about is bloody Alton Towers, right? Because they had the time of their lives, because it will be what we want it to be. And that's a really important lesson in life. And I tell you where the number one thing that instigates closed loop thinking is survival. So we're a species. If you strip us back and go back 200,000 years, we foraged the earth and we were on survival mode every day. It's still our number one innate response, in line with Steve Peters' chimp paradox theory. So survival is constantly eating away at us. Now, in the modern day world, survival is not running away from saber-toothed tigers or being the risk of being killed every day.
Yeah. Survival
to us now is about protecting our ideas, our egos, our reputations, not being exposed. So what closed loop thinking does is, if you fear in a survival mode that something, might go wrong and you might be accountable for that, then you closed loop think by already putting your line in the sand and going, right, I'm telling you now it's not going to work. So when it all goes tits up, you can't blame me. So I understand the human dynamic of where it comes from, but what you're doing in the meantime is you're cutting off all of your growth, all of your opportunities, all of your positivity, and you almost retract from trying to make something work, and that's not going to serve you well in the long run.
No, that's a really good way of looking at that, mine. I was just going to have a few more questions for you. And one of the ones that I wanted to cover is school education. I think I've heard you mention this on Pig Wrestling Podcast. I'm certain that you've read it in your book in terms of the education curriculum. Obviously, I spoke to you before this and explained that I work in a school myself. And I wanted to wonder what you would teach children today to be ready for a modern world.
Oh, Dave, you set me up here, aren't you? Because I may have a popular or unpopular position on education, and the first thing I'd say is it's not to say a lot of my family are in education. It's not to say that anybody who works in education doesn't graft, work hard, and do their very, very best for our children. And our education system in the UK today, globally, is still one of the most advanced in the world. Don't get me wrong. There's plenty of countries and cultures who are in a completely different position. But here's my point. If you think about our education and our curriculum and the way we teach children, it's served us well for a number of years, but it's not changed very much, probably in 80, 100 years, in the fact that we have certain subjects that we teach kids, like science, maths, English, history, all of that type of stuff. We have this curriculum that we have these levels, like, different levels. And in primary schools, they call it, bronze, silver, gold. And then as you go into secondary school, you have gradings and, it's sort of served a purpose for years. But as we've evolved and as we've changed, one of the challenges with that is, for me, people have more choice than ever in the modern day world. If you think about 50 years ago, Dave, I think that there were maybe a dozen industries that you went into in your career, and you worked within the proximity of where you lived, because you didn't have the technology and the transport that we have now. So you'd go through school, you'd come out, you'd either be an engineer or you'd work in manufacturing back in the day, or you'd work as a fireman, police force, NHS in the public sector. You'd work in education, the traditional industries that have always been there for the last 50 to 70 years. But you look at the world now, and it's a completely different world. There's no shortage of things that you can do. I mean, you could leave school now with a credit card and a PC, set up a business and be trading within 12 hours, right? It's just the way of the world.
It's crazy.
So people have more choice than ever is my first point. And because of that, I think that some of the traditional ways of learning are almost never going to be applied in the real world. So, for example, unless you're going to be an astrophysicist or a scientist, when would you ever use algebra? It's a classic example, right? My point has always been, one of the things we have to teach the generations coming through is life skills. So for the world they are going to live in, what do they need to know? And things like how to buy a house, what is a mortgage, what bills do you have when you first move into a house, what's council tax, what's home and contents insurance. They don't get taught that at school, and then they're expected to get on the property ladder and they haven't got a clue, right? Hopefully they've got parents who can guide them, so that's just a thingy example. But I would also shift target to some of the curriculum around the jobs they're likely to have. So rather than teaching the mental maths or how to work out practical maths, the reality is our kids are never going to have to calculate any mathematical equation on a piece of paper in their life. Do you know why? Because they're going to do it on a computer or a smartphone or a device or a calculator. Yeah. They don't need to show their workings out on a piece of paper. Now, you could say if you understand the mental, practical way of working out a mathematical equation, then it's going to be even more simple when you do it digitally. But I'm just making the point that the world has shifted in 100 years massively. But as the educational system and the curriculum shifted in alignment with it, my answer to that would be probably not.
I totally agree with you, Martin, in the sense like life skills are something I think I should have been taught, and that was 12 years ago. And we're still back in the same sort of teachings and methods now. And I can't understand like the fact we've just now had a period where we've had sort of a downtime in terms of school, like there's less school activity, and it's a perfect opportunity to change that curriculum. I was speaking to a child psychologist on a podcast recently, and she's the same. She thought this was the absolute time now to change the way curriculum should be taught to children, and yet it sounds like we're just going to go back to what we've been doing again, and we're probably going to put more emphasis on learning because of what's been missed, and less focus on things that will actually be life skills, really. And I think that's just a shame if that is what the way we move, instead of actually being, let's take some time, let's teach some life skills, let's less focus on these things and make people more ready for the world today.
Yeah, and I think a massive opportunity is on a really, if it's positioned at the right level, is a little bit of psychology in school curriculum around getting children, certainly in adolescent years and secondary school, to understand their emotions and how their brain works and where the fight or flight chemical comes from and what would bring that on, and coping mechanisms of how you rationalize in stressful situations. Because if we're going to have an impact on mental health going forward, which is a big topic for everybody at the minute, I mean, it's always been there, but I think it's just becoming more apparent than ever. Then one of the part of the problem is when children are growing up and going through school, which is tough, and then leaving school, they don't know how to deal with their emotions. They don't know what their emotions are. They don't know where they come from. They don't know why they feel sad. What is the difference between being depressed and just being in a threat state or being under pressure? Because this is another big thing I say. I don't believe that you can talk about, the generation, they don't make them like they used to. They're all depressed and stressed these days. I just think what we're doing these days, and it's got a number of factors that links into it, like social media and the digital world and what they're exposed to. But I think we're catastrophizing basic human stress. So what I mean by that is, we all grew up with avoidant attachment styles with post-war grandparents and parents, where you were brought up to be independent and get on with it. And you were dealing with situations on a daily basis out there in the world more than our kids are, without a doubt, right? But I think they're catastrophizing stress, and then it very quickly becomes misinterpreted into I'm depressed or I'm whatever it might be. Now, I'm not saying all people aren't. I'm just saying that if we can get our kids to understand what's happening, what the stress response is, coping mechanisms of how you compartmentalize it and deal with it before it becomes a habitual ongoing problem, then we've got a fighting chance. We've got a fighting chance of making a dent, but that's got to be included in education, because not as an afterthought when it's all happening. So yeah, I mean, listen, it's hard to get it perfect, but I do think there's going to be some key changes that would make a huge difference in education, and I think we've got to align our education system towards the world that our future generation is going to live in, and not based on what we've been doing for the last 50 years.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you on that, Martin. The one thing that concerns me from speaking about this sort of topic is listening. Just listen and let them have a voice in terms of children. Let them express their emotions and talk to parents or talk to adults at work. If they talk to people, then that's going to help in terms of their emotions and being able to share them things. Don't let them bottle it up or not have anyone to talk to is going to be the biggest thing in terms of that mental health in secondary, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely right. And think about 20, 30 years from now. There are some things that kids are doing in school with the foresight of going into certain jobs that will not exist.
Yeah.
They will not exist, right? So, in 20, 30 years from now, as a business owner, you won't have accountants and finance people and people punching numbers into spreadsheets. You will have some AI technology that does it all for you, right? And therefore, but you will have certain other jobs where it still needs, human beings to do that role. So it's about looking ahead as well, I think, and working with industries and working with organizations to say, what does the workplace look like in 20, 30 years? And therefore, how do we gear up our education system to give you, the next generation who are going to thrive in those roles? But yeah, it's not an easy fix, and it's not something we can turn around overnight, but it's definitely something we should be debating and thinking about.
Yeah, I totally agree. And speaking of being like humans and stuff, you wrote a book that's called I Am Human, but what does being human mean to you?
Being human, it's a great question as we come to the end of this podcast, Dave, I think, because being human is the biggest misconception I think we have in terms of we see ourselves as a superior race in the species on planet Earth, right? We are an animal. That's all we are. Homo sapiens, we are an animal. Chimpanzees, lions, tigers, all the different species on Earth, we started out as Homo sapiens, foraging the earth as an animal. And if you think of us like that, what's happened is there was a key turning point in history where if you read the book Sapiens by Noah Yuval Harari, it's a great book, and Sapiens takes you on the journey of our evolution. There was a key turning point about 250,000 years ago where cavemen and women, or Homo sapiens foraging the earth at that time, used to use fire to keep warm in an evening, right, and keep predators away. And we used fire in that context for years. And then what happened was, at some point along the line, the theory is that we discovered that we could cook our food on the fire. And one thing changed in our anatomy at that point. When we discovered that we could cook food on the fire, we could digest our food a lot quicker. It used to take 3 days to digest berries, where it could take 2 hours to digest cooked meat. So what happened is our body changed over time, over thousands of years. Our intestines started to shrink and become more efficient. Our brain developed and grew because the nutrients and was flowing to the brain. We developed a prefrontal cortex behind our forehead, which was a rational, logical brain. We learned to build tools, hunt, farm. The rest is history. So although we are an advanced species and we are at the top of the food chain and we are Homo sapiens and we run the earth and the thing, we are still an animal. And the reason why I say, when you ask the question, what does it mean to be human, is we are very basic at a functional level. We have 3 needs in life: survival, reproduction, and purpose. We have to survive every single day. We have our fight or flight, and stress is a good thing. We get the stress and the anxiety response because one day it'll keep us alive.
Yeah.
The problem being is it's gone from life or death situations to Facebook and what somebody posts is that aimed at me versus am I going to lose my job versus what does, all of this stuff, right? So number 1, survival. Number 2, we have to find a mate and reproduce. We're no different to any other species, right? It's why sex is great. We have to look at somebody and go, they're all right, because we have to continue the species. And number 3 is really important. And this brings me to my final point: purpose. As well as surviving and reproducing, the third and final function of every Homo sapien on this planet is this. At an individual level, we have to feel like we contribute in some way. We have a sense of belonging, or we have a good, something to contribute to. And for many of us, that's our career in modern day. For some of us, it's family. For some of us, it's charity work or a hobby. For some, it's a mixture of all 3. But here's what I find: human beings who feel relatively safe and are not constantly in a survival, fight or flight mode, they have a family or a tribe around them who are pretty safe. And at an individual level, they feel like they have a true purpose. They are one hell of a productive, motivating human being. If any of those 3 things are taken away from us as a human, we start to wobble. If we feel under threat all the time, we start to wobble. If those around us feel under threat or are not coping, we start to wobble. If we don't feel like we serve a purpose in anything that we do, then we have a big wobble. So what it means to be human is strip everything back in life, simplify life to 3 things: survival, reproduction, and purpose. And find out, if you're having a tough time, find out which of those is missing. And I tell you something, Dave, I coach thousands of people. Almost always it's purpose. When people don't feel like they contribute in some way, or they are valuable in some way, or they are appreciated in a certain way, it really affects you. So, and that's fortunately the one that you can change. If you don't feel like you're getting purpose in what you do, make a change. It's as simple as that.
That's a fantastic
long-winded answer, but does that make sense?
No, honestly, that's a fantastic answer to that question. I really appreciate that one. And just finally, what makes you stay humble, Martin?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, some might say, is Martin even humble? But I think I am. And I think my sense of purpose keeps me humble. I think knowing where I've come from, I'm always the most uneducated man in the room academically. I am. I never went on to higher education. I joined the military. I mean, obviously since then I've done qualifications and stuff, but in terms of initial I'm always uneducated academically, but I'm probably always the most educated socially, which I think really helps. But I think where I've come from, council estate, we never had anything growing up. I think because I can link back to that and always think back to that, then I'm incredibly grateful for what I have, which is a wonderful family, a nice house. I have a business which is thriving at the minute. So I never get carried away because I always know where I've come from. And at the end of the day, I also know what I want at the end of it all, where I'm heading, what do I want to achieve at the end. And for me, it's very, very simple. It's freedom. I'm always driven by the end game being freedom. And part of that is financial freedom in the world we live in, don't get me wrong, but freedom of choice and options. So if I can become financially free by working hard and staying humble and making sure that I never take my eye off the ball, then I'll achieve that freedom. And then I've got choices. In my last 20, 25 years of my life or whatever that is, to have choices and be free is a wonderful thought. So I think that's what keeps me humble.
That's a great way to finish this podcast, Martin. Thank you very much for taking part in this podcast, Martin. Where can people reach out to you if they want to speak to you or get a bit more detail in terms of what you have discussed on this podcast?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to check out the book that you've mentioned, I Am Human, 30 Mistakes of Success, it's on Amazon. You can just search for it.
Buy it.
Yeah, buy it.
Yeah, buy it, definitely.
It's only £7. You can buy it. But if you want to contact us at Trans2 Performance in terms of what we do here as a business, you can email us at help@trans2performance.com, or you can check out our website on www.trans2performance.com. Also YouTube, we have plenty of videos and TED Talk style talks on YouTube. Just search for Martin Johnson at T2 on YouTube and you'll be able to find it.
That's great, man. Thank you very much for joining me on this podcast.
Awesome. Thank you for having me, Dave. I enjoyed that, mate.
Thank you.